Hello again. I'm Kenny Fikes, your host of the iKnowMedia Roundtable, where we bring you conscientious clarity through empirical experience alongside reasoned application and analysis. Going around the horn, how are you guys today and who are you?
Hey, I'm Elisa Simmons. I'm a Montessori guide from East Texas. I'm a military brat, and I am saddened that we're going to get to have the same conversation again, but it's needed.
Hi, I'm Jayshree Ellis. Those who love me call me Jay. I am a mom of three. I'm a physician. I'm a disability advocate, and I'm tired, but I'm always ready for this conversation on this show.
Thank you all. So I'm actually tired today as well. And for the first time, I've heard others of you on the show say that you were kind of tired of talking about these issues. They just wear you out sometimes, and we all get that. But as far as our show goes, this is the first time today that I kind of felt like that. People were talking about Breonna Taylor all day and the officers in Louisville, and I just said, I just don't want to talk about it today, right? I got to have the luxury not to talk about it. But in this show, I have to pep myself back up, and we're not going to focus on that in general unless someone wants to bring it up, but it makes sense. But just a kind of a hodgepodge. We started this thing off 27 or so shows ago, just saying something's happening, and we wanted to do our part to keep the conversation alive. And so that's what we're doing. So today we're just circling back to some of that original focus about the injustices that are going on. And our theme today is that Black lives isn't just about being shot in the back or being choked for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. It's about a lot of other things. Everyday life, pun intended, tells us that Black lives don't matter. And so we want to go around and talk about certain things. So let's start off talking about the difference in the disparity in sentencing with the lady who was sentenced to 5 years for lying on an application to get her son in a school. I don't know if she was homeless or if that was just sort of adding fodder to the cannons of the people who support her. Nevertheless, falsified documents to get her son in a better school versus the other situation where the lady is simply getting 14 days in jail. Lisa, why don't you start us off today?
So, over my years in education, I can honestly say this year alone, I could name a handful of people who I know are going to school out of their district and have probably not said where they live properly. Every year it's the same thing. And most of the time in those situations, you do it for a plethora of reasons. Mainly, though, it's the person who's going to take care of your child while you're at work lives in that school district, or the school district is a better school district to where you're zoned. And so it's either that you're trying to survive because you need to work, and so you need that person to care for your child, or you're trying to give your child the best education you can. And this is one of the easiest ways to do it, is to go to a school outside of your district. With the situation with the Hollywood actresses compared to, I actually know two women. One was, she lied on her application and she put her babysitter's address down because the babysitter was going to take her child to school in the morning and was going to pick her child up. She got 5 years. 5 years. So think about the domino effect that that's going to have, not only on her life, because now she's a convicted felon, but also her child has lost a mother for 5 years of that child's life. Then there's another situation where the mother lied and put the father's application address down. She put her father's address down. And I'm not sure the circumstances of why she did that, but she got 5 years. So you're telling me if you pay $150,000 and mistakenly cheat to get into a college, having a domino effect that affects other college applicants because those other students didn't get that spot, that you get 14 days on a federal sponsored vacation. That's some bullshit. It's just as simple as that.
The two situations you talked about where the documents were falsified for addresses, were those both people of color?
Yeah, it was two different black women, two different states.
Gotcha. Okay. What do you got, Jay?
Yes, I recall reading about the one of the stories that Elisa was referring to, and I think it occurred in Ohio, where this one single mom had two sons, and she was in a poor school district. was concerned about that, wanted them to get the best education, and she used her father's address, and she went to prison for that. I think that in addition to this just being an awful double standard, what is also sad that no one's really talking about is the fact that these women didn't do this just out of greed, right? I have to tell you that I think that for someone like, what's her name? The woman from Full House, Laughlin, or whatever her name is. I think she did that out of greed. She did that because she just wanted her kids in this prestigious school. And what really makes me angry is that these children don't sound like they were prepared to be in that school. So she had all of the resources in the world to prepare them to be super competitive applicants. But instead, they did whatever they did. Obviously, their counselors didn't feel that it was likely that they would get admitted to the school on their own merit. So it angers me that they didn't take the time to prepare their kids for this level of competition, and then were willing to steal the seats from someone else, when again, they had all the resources to make this happen for their kids. Let's compare this now to people who don't have that much money, and all they want for their kids is not greed, they want a better chance. They want their kids to not be in a school that is rift with gangs sometimes, teachers who are overworked, overtaxed, under-resourced. They don't want a school district that doesn't have enough money to give the basic supplies. They just want a chance for their kids. And these people went to prison. I think you can't even compare them really, because it's so egregious when you're doing it just because you're greedy. You're wealthy and you can, and these children of Lori Loughlin's, I mean, one of them was already kind of making her way as an influencer on social media. So she was already making her own money, had her own endorsements, and she seemed pretty happy with what she was doing. I recall when this all first hit, there was a lot of video footage of her saying how much she didn't really want to be in school. She could get on air and almost brag about the fact that she didn't want to be at this prestigious school that some other kids would have died to get into. So it wasn't even necessary for her to do that. That was just greedy. And it really galls me that she got this very light sentence. And honestly, I don't even think she was sentenced for the offense of actually getting her kids into a school illegally. It was more that it was fraud. That was what the government was more pissed off about, was the tax fraud, not that she actually stole seats from deserving students.
Right. So what does it say about the mindset of judges? Now, we know that it wasn't the same judge who sentenced all three people that we just referred to. But what does it say about a judge? I'm going to say what I believe. And it's not about, so someone, let me say this. I saw a post on Facebook today and it mentioned the race card. And I responded that I don't like that terminology, the race card, because in my mind, that implies that it's a Black person using it as sort of an ace in a game where it freezes the white person to say, oh, if I argue that, it would be like using the N-word. So now this is your sort of kryptonite for me to be able to argue. When the reality is, it's not a game and everyday things in life have to do with it, but sometimes it is just what it is. And so the idea is that it's, when people say the race card, is that a Black person is just throwing out some sort of innocuous nomenclature to simply describe a situation that renders the facts of the situation useless. With that said, not everything is about race, but in the United States of America, if you know very much about the history, past and very recent, a lot of things come down to money and a lot of things come down to race. Be that as it may, it's okay that we talk about it and sift through it. What's not okay is that we pretend it doesn't exist. So with that said, my little diatribe about not liking the race card, some would say I'm playing it when I say that I'm getting into the psyche of a judge who sentences this woman to 14 days in jail. I think what he or she is saying is that this is a good American woman. He doesn't say good white woman. He says good woman who's the mother of some kids. And if we put her away for any significant amount of time, it's going to affect those kids' lives and ruin people's careers and things of that nature. That means that her life matters. And I will also look into the camera and say this. I'm not telling you I believe she should have gotten the book thrown at her. I'm not telling you that I don't agree with that. I'm not telling you that I don't agree that she probably exercised bad judgment and hopefully she's learned something from that. I am okay with all of that. The comparison is that when it happens to a Black woman, whatever the situation is, even though these are not comparable, as Jay Cherie said, let's just say that they were. What happens in the Black woman's case is they don't consider her children. They don't consider that she's going to have a felony. They don't consider that those kids are going to go 5 years without money. They don't consider that when she comes out after 5 years, she's going to probably be able to work at minimum wage or a little bit better, maybe gain her way up to that. They don't consider the psychological effects on those kids that are left without a mother. Why? Because that Black life does not matter. And these are the things that I want to continue to point out. It's not just about outrage in the streets and protests when people are shot and killed. Lives are ruined daily because the system does not believe that lives like mine matter. What do you got, Elisa?
I need people to Google search and just see the stark difference in, if you Google search mother sentenced to 5 years in jail for wrong address, lying on school enrollment, and you're going to get Black and brown cases that come up. You're not going to get that on white cases. And we all know that there's white moms that are struggling and they want their kid in a better school district and they lie on their application. We know this is a thing. And so if you don't want to identify it as Black Lives Matter and you don't want to make it a race issue because you can't, it makes you uncomfortable, I need you then to say, okay, this is enough of an American issue, that make it a class issue, that rich people get away with things that poor people or middle class to lower class don't get away with, if that's what makes you comfortable. But you have to identify that there's a problem. And I think for so many Americans, specifically white Americans, right now, they're so uncomfortable and tired of talking about race. But it's true, Kenny. I know multiple situations. I could give name. I could beg them to be on the show and tell their story, where a white person has gone in front of a judge and said, I hated Texas, and went home. And then you have a Black kid who's on his very first offense and they go to jail. I know a guy who got 20 years in jail for his very first offense, and he had fetal alcohol syndrome. Like, he had special needs and got 20 years. I don't know a white kid that did that. I know a little white girl who drove and got drunk and killed 4 kids in the car and got probation. That's what I know. I can't tell you I know that story of a Black or brown person. And so if you just are tired of hearing Black people talk about it, or white people who you think are overly trying to be woke, do the research yourself and go look this up and see this is an American issue. And if you're truly a patriot, you want all of the citizens to feel good about this, take a stand, make a point of saying this is some BS.
What do you think, Jay?
Okay, well, I do want to address the issue of the race card in that expression. When people say that, it very much minimizes the idea of race playing a factor. And the thing that I want people to understand about that statement is disrespectful, because it suggests that we're playing a game, and we're not. Right. For those of us who bring up race, it's not a game at all. We bring it up, and again, remember, we get tired of having the conversation. We really do. So we're bringing it up because it is very serious, and because there are always repercussions of race. And the people who are feeling the repercussions tend to be the people who are in less power, and oftentimes it's people of color in this nation. As for Lori Loughlin, let's also remember that this woman had many opportunities to plead, to enter a plea for a lesser sentence. She refused to. I mean, intermittently, you would see these articles about her and her husband, and he just has a huge ego, right? They were not going to admit to anything. They were going, everybody else, 30 some odd people in that scandal, and everybody else took a plea and said, okay, yeah, we did it. What do we have to do? Let's put it behind us. No one else was willing to go to trial. These were the only two. That is how bold they were. That is how entitled they felt to what they did. I don't think that demonstrates any remorse at all when you go that long, refusing to take a plea. And you also you must believe that you actually are going to do well in court. that with all that evidence that you actually did this stuff, it's not that, it doesn't matter what your intent was. You did it and it was illegal. And you're not even disputing that you did it. You're just saying that's not what you didn't have bad intentions when you did it. And therefore you don't need to take the plea. Well, I think you have to consider that. And you have to wonder why a judge would go lightly on her. Because I thought when you don't want to take the plea deal, they get to throw the book at you. And that's not really what happened to her. So I think that we need to remember that. You know, my feeling about it is that there are many judges, not all, but many judges who are going to look at a white person and they feel that there's something redeeming about them, that they have something to be redeemed. Some people do not see that in people who are not white. I think another example of that is that guy, I think his name was Brock something or other at Stanford. You know, there was incontrovertible evidence that he raped a woman while she was drunk and incapacitated. And the judge actually made a comment about what a good kid he was. And he had a whole life ahead of him. Because look at him. He was at Stanford and he was a swimmer and all of this. Said this nonsense to justify why he wasn't giving him any, really, I don't think the kid got a sentence. Maybe got probation or something.
6 months.
And this was with proof that he violated this woman. And it's because a judge can look at a white young man like that and think about all of his possibility and the community that he comes from and the people who love him. And that tends not to be what they see when they look at non-white people. And so that's something that we always have to be aware of. There oftentimes are double standards, and it's nothing that we can really prove because the mindset of a judge could involve so many different things. You can't prove that it is just race. But I think Lori Loughlin's case shows us that there are some really horrific double standards that our criminal justice system embraces.
And so what you just described was beautifully addressed in terms of what Black Lives Matter means, right? In terms of thinking about people as less than human and not seeing the opposite of this kid from Stanford vis-a-vis that judge, and not seeing potential, not seeing the humanity. Now, this is one case where I'll say I'm Black or white. I'm not going to say this guy rapes a woman and we want to really talk about considering what he has to offer the world in his future. He has to do his time, and once he does his time, he's free like anyone else. But was the judge talking about the young lady who he raped? I mean, probably not.
Yes.
With that said, here's where this reminds me of 1994, watching the television and seeing a white Bronco in pursuit in Los Angeles County in the city of Los Angeles. And if we all recall, it was Orenthal James Simpson. And after he was acquitted, we all remember the famous, and to some, the infamous Johnny Cochran. I shouldn't even give that any credit, but it's because I'm not going to say he got OJ off. It was a fair trial, and the evidence was not preponderance enough to show that he was guilty, that OJ was guilty. And so white people didn't understand what Black folks were celebrating, and again, changed the narrative. I'm speaking directly to what Jay Cherie was just talking about. What Black people were celebrating, folks who don't get it, is that the criminal justice for once, for a Black man who was wealthy, worked because he could hire the best legal defense available. And whether that judge wanted to convict him or not, he couldn't, because the evidence was not preponderance enough, and a reasonable doubt, a shadow of a doubt was cast by a great legal team. And this guy was able to get the kind of justice that white people get in the court system versus being railroaded. And that's what Black people were celebrating. They were not celebrating a man getting off of murder. They were not celebrating and disrespecting Nicole Simpson. They were celebrating that the court system worked for us once like it works for other people. What do you got, Elisa?
Well, and that's what it's not. This isn't a new thing. You just brought up 94. I can remember in the mid 80s, I think late 80s, I remember watching Rodney King get his butt whooped. And I remember being like, so those police officers are going to jail, right? I was little. I was like 7 or 8. And so I remember when that happened. And but I think when people think about the ideal of the burden of being Black in America, I need you to think back to how long ago. This isn't a new thing. This isn't because social media gave a platform and just gave Kenny and Jay an opportunity to a bitch about being black. My husband's mother was pregnant with him in 1979, gave birth early 80s. My husband's middle name is Broderick. She purposely gave him the first name of Thomas because on applications, so this is a young woman who had to think 20 years ahead so that on an application, his name would be Thomas B. Simmons, which kind of sounds white. And so like, just think about that. Like, who has to think about that when they're in one of the best times of their life because they don't want their child's name to sound so ethnic? My husband was actually cornered by a family member, and when I was pregnant with my daughter, because this family member said she deserved to know how ethnic our daughter's name was going to be, because she wanted to get used to it. She didn't want to have a surprise of how ethnic the name was going to be. And so this isn't like, this is the beginning of life for a black child. Just think about that. Like, how devastating is that? Like, it's horrible.
Well, that was thoughtful by your mother-in-law, but I know that there's probably more people who don't think about it, because there's some very culturally stereotypical names out there. The thing I would say in response to what you just said, regardless of socioeconomic status, boy or girl, north or south, east or west, that is unfortunate. That does take away from the childhood of specifically black males, and it may be females as well, but I know for a fact black males. Whereas a boy is 9 or 10 or 11 or 12, and we've talked about this on the show before, this is particularly true if that young man is larger and looks older than he really is. If he's 12 and he looks 15, or if he's 10 and he looks 13, instead of just allowing that child to have the innocence of a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old and just to play and get on his bike and ride, or just go to the corner and play some hoops, or do whatever it is, or watch a little extra TV when he's done with his homework, as a father or mother of a black boy of that age, you have to have these conversations about how to deal with law enforcement, how to deal with people in the world, how to deal with a white male store manager in Alabama. I don't want to stereotype them all. I just want to say statistically that the numbers are not with us. And so, yeah, childhood is stolen and those things have to be done. There's no black man alive that's older than X number of years that doesn't have a number of stories. Some that they tell are pretty egregious, and some are less, like this one. It's egregious, but what I mean is the trauma on me was not great. But the older I got, the more I realized how effed up it was. I remember like yesterday being a little boy in Durham, North Carolina at about 8 years old. My mom got pulled over for a speeding ticket. The guy asked her to get out of the car. He asked her to put her hands on this is a woman with her little boy, and he was like frisking her. And as I looked back, I was like, he was filling her up is what he was doing. It was a Durham police officer in the 70s. He was basically filling up my mother, acting like he was frisking. And I remember saying, my mom's not a crook, like it was upsetting me. And she was like, baby, it's all right, kind of thing. Well, those kinds of stories don't happen to white people. Sorry, they just don't. What do you got, Jay?
I think that what I would want white America to know, we have to discuss with our kids. Like, let me give you an example of what white America might say to their kids and what we have to say to ours. So, we're always teaching our kids, don't just follow the crowd, right? Be careful who you hang out with. Birds of a feather flock together. You don't want to get in trouble because they're doing the wrong thing. That's pretty much a universal lesson. But Black people have to have a second part of that lesson. And that goes, you need to know that you may not get away with what your white friends will get away with. And we have to keep telling the boys that, especially. So they need to understand that if they're involved in a group that is suspected of having committed a crime, if that crime was committed, they are probably more likely to be implicated first, tried and convicted first. And even if they see their white counterparts doing things that they know to be wrong, maybe their white counterpart never gets called to the carpet on it. There's a good chance that they will. And there's a good chance it won't go well for them. So we have to have that extra discussion, and we have to keep teaching that. It's things like when we think about what our kids wear. We have to tell our kids what not to wear. It's not just a matter of dressing for the occasion. It's not just a matter of dress professionally when you have a business meeting or whatever, but it's like, you shouldn't walk down the street in a hoodie. I know it's not right. And we all have to have that conversation, because your kids are like, well, that's not fair. I should be able to wear what I want. And yes, you should. And yes, you can wear what you want. But you need to understand that if you put on that hoodie, someone may look at you and they're not going to see you for who you are. They're already feeling threatened by you. And now you've got on a hoodie and they're sure that you are coming to mug or carjack them. So it's not worth it. And it's very unfair. For women in the workplace, a lot of women love to wear cornrows. They love to wear braids, and that's a part of who they are, their culture, what makes them happy. A lot of jobs, you cannot do that. And it's not that those women are not professionally dressed, but if you walk in with an ethnic hairstyle, one, if it's a job interview, you may not get that job. And two, if you're doing that at your job, you might have a supervisor say something to you, or maybe they never do. Maybe they just have whatever notions they have about you, but you're not likely to advance because this is not the place for that ethnic hairstyle, which is harming no one. And so this is the consciousness that we have to live with, and this is what we have to teach our kids. And these are the things that when people start asking, what are you guys so mad about? Like, slavery was over a long time ago. Come on, you guys got the right to vote. You had a Black president. What are you complaining about? It's things like this. It's having to always be aware of things like this. Like Henny mentioned, when it comes to our kids and driving, if we have Black youths that are out there driving, you're worried till your kids come home, because you know that they may just be stopped for driving while they're Black. If they're driving a luxury car, they're probably more likely to be stopped for driving while Black and have to prove who they are and why they have that car. These are things that go on, and it worries us to death as parents. And again, we have to teach those lessons without making our children so fearful that they don't want to go out into the world, without making them so angry that they don't want to be around white people, because we don't want that to happen either. So we always have to kind of toe that line and teach that lesson, but don't teach it too much. And it's exhausting and it's unfair.
It is exhausting. Backtracking to one of the things you said about boys, particularly, who can't get away with the things that their friends get away with, who are white, Black boys, that is. You know, I remember when my son was in junior high, you know, this group of boys, they all got in trouble because they were just being, you know, the whole boys will be boys. After football practice, they want to break into the cafeteria and steal chips. They want to get nachos and chips and stuff from the cafeteria, because that's like what 13 and 14-year-old boys are getting into to be bad, right? Well, these are all good kids who play football and they just did something stupid. Well, my son and some of those other boys, it was a mixed crowd. But, you know, he got the third degree from me, and he never did anything like that again. But the point is, because he was in that group of a mixed crowd, they were treated differently. I believe that had that been a group of just Black boys, they'd have been they would have been suspended and everything else. These boys got like a few hours of detention and had to do some kind of service. But it was a group of, you know, sort of socioeconomically higher mixed Black and white boys. Also, when he was 17, he had his car, or his 18, it was a Tahoe, a Chevy Tahoe, and he was pulled over, and with police, and he's now a policeman, right? And like drawing guns at him, right? Well, that's my son, my baby. But he handled it well. He was okay. The reason it happened is because someone had stolen his tag and put the stolen car's tag on his, but they're both Black Tahoes. But he handled it well. They said, "Show me your hands." He got out. But you just have to wonder, if he were a white 18-year-old, would they have had the guns drawn on, right? Don't know, but it's a query. Those are the things we worry about. And I worry about folks, Elisa, who would say that we're bitching about being Black, because if they do, that means that they're not listening to a word that we're saying, and they dismiss it before it's ever said. So those are some of my little things there. And I'll end after you have something to say, Elisa, about the people who say, well, whites get stopped unjustifiably. Whites get beat up by the police officers. There are white people in jail, etc. I'm going to address that in a second. But go ahead, Elisa.
Well, going back to the son, my son is 10. He weighs 120 pounds. He's 5 foot. He looks old. Tonight, we ran to a store for the first time in forever, and they had a Superman shirt with a cape on it. And I was messing with him and I was like, hey, you know, do you need this shirt? And for a split second, I looked for this super young shirt in my son's size in hopes, because I'm actually fearing. So that's what, like, when you watch this show and you think about this, I'm actually fearing the ideal that my son's going to outgrow the little kid section, not because it's going to hurt my heart, but because he's then going to look even older. Like, I truly wanted to buy my 10-year-old giant son a shirt with a cape that said Superman with a rippable cape. Like, and it was one of the reasons was because it would help him look little. And just think of, like, have you had that thought? To any of the people who choose to watch this that are white, have you ever had that thought when you dressed your son, a 10-year-old, I'm going to put him in a cape so that maybe someone will realize he's little? Like, if you have it, that's a privilege.
Yeah. So to wrap us up on this whole Black Lives Matter idea, it's not just about being shot. I'm going to say this for the people who go, oh, but I'm being cynical, right? Oh, but white people get shot. Oh, but what? Well, here's the difference. Black men in S550, $95,000 Mercedes-Benz who are businessmen, executives, lawyers, doctors, entrepreneurs, whatever, get stopped and harassed by the police because they really want to say N-word, where'd you get this money? I don't understand how you did this. There's nothing going on like sagging pants or you know, Mr. T Gold or any of that. It's because of the color of that man or woman's skin and that car. White men in suits and ties in Mercedes-Benzes don't get harassed by the police. Now, like any of us, if you're going 80, 85 or 90 in a car that feels like it's going 60, you're going to get stopped and get a ticket. White and black, doesn't matter. But you don't get that harassing. So yes, everyone gets stopped. But black men get harassed about being in their own neighborhoods or in their friends' neighborhoods and what kind of cars they drive, if they're well-spoken, if they're educated, clean, together, etc. Sharp. Doesn't matter. In a sweatsuit, some people call them track suits, jogging suits coming from the gym. I know that I used to get asked for my ID if I was wearing a hat and jeans. And if I were in a suit and tie, I never got asked for my IDs using my card. It was kind of weird. Now, that kind of is contrary to my point with police officers. But here's where I'm going with the white people who say white people get harassed. The white people who get harassed, and don't be mad at me, people, for this. We all know what meth heads look like, right? We know what the people out there on the opioids and the meth heads look like. You wouldn't let them in your house. Those are the white people who get harassed by police officers. You know what a mouth of terrible teeth looks like. You know what the cracky, blotchy skin looks like. You know what the greasy hair that hasn't been washed or combed in days or weeks looks like. You know what those jeans that haven't been washed in a week looks like. You know what that shaky behavior looks like. Those are the white people that get harassed by cops, not just the white lawyer coming home to his family in his nice neighborhood. Huge difference. The black people who look etchy and sketchy like that, they're likely to be killed. There's a difference, folks. Black lives need to matter. Right now they don't, but we'd like them to. Anything to add going out on that?
Yes, I think with this topic, I love the topic because it actually makes us dissect what Black Lives Matter means. I think it is very easy for us to think it only means that Black people shouldn't be killed unjustly, but that isn't what it means at all. That's just one manifestation. I think what it means is that the hope that Black lives have matters. The dreams that an individual person has matters. They're the things that make them happy, the people who love them, the people who have dreams for them, what they may be able to contribute to society, all of those things matter. And the problem is that our society often doesn't think of Black people in those terms. They don't think about hopes and dreams. They don't think about what the parents thought when they were pregnant with that child and that child came into the world. They don't think about the fact that this person may be hardworking and very intelligent and positively contributing to the community. They don't think about the possibilities and a positive future for that person. And that's what we want America to think about. Because I think when you can look at Black people or any person for that matter, and you see their humanity, it becomes much harder for you to feel comfortable with oppressing them. So that's what we mean when we say that Black Lives Matter. It's not just the existence of life, but it has to do with the sustenance of a meaningful life. And that does not mean a life behind bars. That does not mean a life where someone is denied their rights. We want to see Black people be able to enjoy their lives and be productive and be happy, just as their non-Black counterparts can and do.
And understanding that the fact that we have to have this conversation is interesting, and that's why we're having it. So until next time, good night.
Good night.